Emma Ashford was 28 years old, yet the words her father shouted when she was 17 still echoed inside her like a memory that refused to fade. She remembered standing in the kitchen while Mark tossed a $40 bill at her face and said, "Get out. I'm done paying for another man's mistake." Her grandmother Grace, her brother Jake, and a few relatives watched from the dining table without speaking. That moment shaped everything that followed. For 11 years, Emma carried a sealed envelope through school, through her nursing shifts, and through every lonely birthday she celebrated alone. She never opened that envelope in front of Mark, not because she feared him, but because she waited for a day when he would be unable to look away from the truth. That day came when he turned 59, during a backyard party filled with nearly 80 guests. Emma knew the moment was approaching when she saw Mark raise a microphone with pride. But the story didn't start there. It began on a quiet April morning when her mother's brother, Ben, arrived with a duffel bag and said two words that changed everything. "Pack up," he told her gently. Emma's mother, Helen, had been the only softness in that house. She had a gift for standing between Emma and Mark without making it obvious. Sometimes she placed a hand on Emma's shoulder when Mark's voice grew sharp. Other times she changed the topic when his eyes turned cold. "You're safe," she would whisper after the tension faded. But when Helen died of cancer at 9 months into her illness, the barrier disappeared. "She fought to stay with you," Ben once told Emma. And Emma believed it because her mother always fought a little longer than expected. After Helen's funeral, Mark stopped pretending to care. Emma overheard him on the phone one evening saying, "She doesn't look like anyone in this family. She never has." She was 10 then, confused by the words but deeply aware of the tone. Jake received new clothes, new bikes, and praise for every sport he tried. Emma got hand-me-downs in silence. On Sundays, Grace slipped small bills into Emma's jacket, squeezing her hand tightly. "You're a good girl, Emma," she whispered with eyes full of something heavier than sadness. Emma didn't know it then, but Grace carried guilt. By the time Emma turned 14, the distance between her and Jake had grown into a canyon. Jake got a brand new blue mountain bike, while Emma asked for $20 to buy a used science book. Mark never looked away from the television. "Ask your real father," he said. Even Jake froze at the sentence. Emma took a dishwashing job at a local Italian restaurant where the owner, Mrs. Duca, let her eat leftovers after closing. She worked long hours at 15, bought her own school supplies, and learned early that silence wasn't safety. It was only permission for neglect. Emma learned to survive on scraps of kindness. She spent most evenings wiping down tables at the restaurant while Jake went to summer camps Mark paid for without hesitation. Mrs. Duca often packed her leftover pasta for later, pretending it was extra food, even though Emma knew she was being cared for quietly. On Sundays, Grace kept giving her small bills, but her eyes had changed. They held guilt, fear, and a kind of sorrow Emma didn't understand. "You matter, sweetheart," Grace whispered often. But Emma noticed she said it like a confession, not a compliment. Emma's 17th birthday was the breaking point. She baked a small vanilla cake from a box she bought with tip money and placed one candle on top. She only wanted a moment to herself, a quiet wish before adulthood forced her out. Mark walked in covered in sawdust, saw the candle glowing, and tossed a $40 bill across the counter. "Happy birthday." "Get out," he said flatly. Grace leaned forward on the sofa but didn't rise. Jake stood on the stairs, gripping the railing, unable to speak. Emma folded the money, blew out the candle, and walked away forever. Ben arrived 40 minutes later in his old blue pickup truck. He looked at Emma's single garbage bag of clothes and didn't ask a single question. "You're home now," he said simply when they reached his small apartment above the repair shop. He gave her a tiny room he'd cleared out, a mattress, and a quilt that smelled like motor oil and clean laundry. He didn't pry or ask about Mark's cruelty. He just showed Emma where the towels were and said breakfast was at 7. It was the gentlest beginning after the harshest ending. That first week Emma barely spoke. She went to school, returned to the little room, and did homework until her eyes hurt. Ben left plates of food outside her door without saying much. One night she found grilled cheese. Another night soup. Once he left a whole roasted chicken. On the 8th night she finally came out and sat at the kitchen table. Ben looked up, nodded, and returned to eating his sandwich. No questions. No pressure. But something inside her unlocked softly. She didn't know then that Ben fought his own battles quietly every day. Leaving Mark's house didn't free Emma completely. His lies followed her. Relatives stopped answering her calls. Cards went unreturned. Invitations never came. When she asked Ben why everyone turned away, he wiped his hands with a shop rag and sighed. "Mark's been telling people your mother confessed something before she passed," he said. Emma felt the world tilt. "She never said any of that," she whispered. Ben nodded. "I know. But people believe the loudest voice." Emma realized then that Mark had weaponized Helen's memory, twisting her silence into a story she never told. Mark's lies spread through the family like smoke slipping under doors. Emma felt it in every unanswered call and every holiday where her chair stayed empty. The worst part wasn't the abandonment, it was how easily people accepted the story. "Why would he lie?" she heard a cousin whisper once. The answer was simple. He needed to blame someone, and Emma was the easiest target. But Mark made one mistake. He told his story to one person who knew the truth. 3 years after Emma left, her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. "Emma, it's Laura," the voice said. "Laura Bennett. I was your mother's best friend." Emma remembered her. Bright hair, loud laugh, and warm hugs from childhood evenings on the porch. Laura's voice tightened. "I heard what your father has been saying. None of it is true." Emma sank into her chair. "I know." Laura continued. "Your mother never confessed anything. I was at the hospital every day. Her last words were about you and Jake." Then Laura said the sentence that changed everything. "Your mother had no secret, Emma. But your father did." Emma's hand shook slightly. "What do you mean?" Laura took a breath. "Your mother suspected Mark was seeing someone during her pregnancy. She never had proof, but she smelled a perfume that wasn't hers. She told me more than once she felt something was wrong." Emma closed her eyes, feeling the pieces shift. "So you're saying—" "I'm saying if anyone's loyalty should have been questioned, it wasn't hers," Laura said softly. "If you want the truth, science doesn't lie. All you'd need is a sample." That idea settled in Emma's mind like a seed finally taking root. Emma waited a year before acting. Not because she doubted Laura, but because she wanted to be certain she was doing it for the right reasons. She wasn't seeking Mark's approval or trying to force his love. She wanted to protect her mother's name. That was the line she drew. The opportunity came at Thanksgiving when Jake called unexpectedly. "Dad's going to the game at noon," he said. "Come by for 30 minutes. I'll make coffee." Emma hesitated but agreed. She drove Ben's truck to the house, remembering every crack in the sidewalk from childhood. Jake met her at the back door with 2 mugs of strong instant coffee. They spoke politely about work, the weather, anything safe. Then the front door opened. Mark froze when he saw Emma. "What is she doing here?" he demanded. "I invited her," Jake said softly. "You don't make decisions in my house," Mark snapped. Emma stood quietly, the old sting returning. She reached for her jacket. On her way out, she saw Mark's mug on the counter, still warm from his hands. She picked it up, slid it into her coat pocket, and walked away without a word. 4 weeks later, the lab results arrived in a plain white envelope. Emma opened it at Ben's kitchen table early one morning before her nursing shift. The room was quiet except for a garbage truck outside. She unfolded the paper and read the numbers slowly. The paternity index was overwhelming. The probability confirmed one thing with absolute clarity. Mark was her biological father. Emma didn't move for almost 20 minutes. She had expected this answer, yet seeing it written in black ink made every wound rise again. It proved the cruelty had never been based on truth. Ben returned home around 6 that evening and found Emma exactly where he had left her, the paper smoothed flat on the table. He read it carefully, then sat beside her. "I always knew," he said quietly. Emma lifted her eyes. "Did Mom tell you?" Ben nodded. "She never stepped outside her marriage. Not once." His voice was steady, reassuring. Emma placed the paper in an envelope, wrote Mark's name on the front, and mailed it the next morning. 2 weeks later, it returned to her mailbox stamped in red, "Returned to sender." Mark hadn't even opened it. Emma placed the unopened envelope in her nightstand and closed the drawer softly. She didn't call him. She didn't chase him. She didn't beg. Instead, she focused on building a life. She graduated from her nursing program second in her class, and Ben sat proudly in the front row wearing a collared shirt she'd never seen him wear before. After graduation, Emma secured a job in the pediatric ward at St. Francis Community Hospital. The shifts were long, 12 hours at times, but she felt useful in a way she never had at home. Helping sick children gave her purpose. By 25, Emma saved enough money for a down payment on a tiny one-bedroom apartment. The ceilings were old and the radiator clanked at night, but the lease had her name on it, just hers. Meanwhile, Mark continued pretending she didn't exist. When Jake married Lily a year later, Emma wasn't invited. She found out through a photo posted online showing Mark smiling proudly behind the couple. No mention of Emma. No empty seat to mark her absence. She closed her phone and returned to work. But relatives were beginning to sense cracks in Mark's version of events. When Mark announced his 59th birthday celebration, Emma felt something shift. The party would have nearly 80 guests, catered food and speeches. It was the type of event Mark used to shape a narrative. But months before the celebration, Grace passed away in her sleep. Emma didn't attend the funeral because Mark said her presence would cause a scene. 3 weeks later, Emma received a call from a lawyer. Grace had left her something. Not money, an envelope with Emma's name on it. Grace had prepared it months before her death, and its contents would change everything. Emma picked up the envelope from the lawyer's office during her lunch break. The handwriting on the front shook slightly, showing the weakness of Grace's final months but also her determination. Emma opened it inside her parked car, hands trembling. Inside were 3 pages written in blue ink. Grace began with an apology, one Emma never expected. She admitted she had known about Mark's betrayal for nearly 3 decades. She had caught him with a woman named Paula months before Emma was born. Grace wrote that she stayed silent out of fear, a choice she regretted until her final breath. Emma read the letter 3 times. Grace described Paula, the secret meetings and the perfume that never belonged to Helen. The details were exact. Dates, places, even the parking lot behind the old community hall. Every line peeled back a layer of silence that had protected Mark for years. But the line that broke Emma's heart was simple. You were always his child and your mother was always faithful. Grace ended by saying she didn't deserve forgiveness, but Emma deserved the truth. The letter was notarized and signed, making every word impossible to dismiss. That evening Emma called Laura. Grace wrote me a letter, she whispered. Laura was silent for a moment before replying. I wondered when she would. Emma asked, You knew? Laura sighed. Your mother suspected something but never found proof. She believed Grace had seen enough to confirm it. Emma stared at the letter in her lap. Why didn't she tell me? Laura answered softly, Helen didn't want you carrying her pain. She wanted you to grow without that weight. Emma held the phone tightly. For the first time she could see the whole picture clearly. With the DNA results and Grace's letter, Emma finally understood that Mark never hated her because she wasn't his. He hated her because she was. Every time he looked at her, he saw Helen, and every time he saw Helen, he remembered his own betrayal. Emma placed both documents into a single envelope and sealed it. She didn't go looking for Mark. She didn't need a confrontation. But she kept the envelope ready, tucked in her drawer, waiting for the moment he tried to rewrite the truth again. That moment arrived sooner than she expected. 3 weeks later, Jake called Emma late on a Wednesday evening. She had been folding her scrubs when the phone rang. Hey, he said quietly as if someone else might overhear. Emma hesitated. Is everything okay? Jake took a shaky breath. Dad's turning 59. There's a big party. I want you there. Emma froze. Jake, he doesn't want me anywhere near that house. Jake's voice softened. I know. But I want you there. You're my sister. Emma closed her eyes, hearing words she had waited decades for. She wasn't sure what would happen, but she agreed to come. Emma thought about the party for 3 days before giving Jake her final answer. She didn't want revenge. She didn't want a scene. She wanted clarity for herself, for Jake, and for the memory of her mother. When she told Ben, he listened quietly while leaning against the counter. What do you want to do? He asked. Emma took a breath. I want to go. Not for Mark, for Jake and for Mom. Ben nodded once. Then go. I'll be outside in the truck. If you need to leave fast, I'll be right there. His steady presence eased her fear. On the morning of the party, Emma dressed simply. A white blouse, small earrings and flat shoes. She slipped the envelope containing the DNA results and Grace's letter into her bag. She didn't plan to use it, but she wanted to be prepared. When she arrived at Mark's house, string lights hung across the backyard, and nearly 80 guests filled the lawn. Laughter, music, and the smell of grilled food floated through the air. Emma saw Ben's truck parked 2 houses away. He gave her a single nod through the window. She inhaled deeply and walked into the yard. Jake met her at the gate, looking both relieved and anxious. "You came," he said. Emma managed a small smile. "I did." He guided her to a seat at the last table near the fence, far from the main gathering. When Emma looked up, she saw Mark standing across the yard, beer in hand, surrounded by friends. The moment he noticed her, his smile vanished. His eyes hardened instantly, and Emma knew the evening would not remain calm. For nearly an hour, Mark pretended she didn't exist, greeting guests and speaking loudly about his life and sacrifices. Near sunset, someone tapped a glass and the music faded. Mark walked to the microphone stand, cleared his throat, and began thanking everyone for coming. He spoke proudly about his work, his sacrifices, and the family he claimed to build with his own 2 hands. Then he placed an arm around Jake and said, "This is my boy. My only boy. My legacy." Several guests glanced toward Emma, uneasy. Mark continued, lowering his voice. "Some of you know my first wife made choices I had to live with." The words hung in the air like a slow-moving storm. Mark raised his chin with confidence. "Tonight I want to set things straight," he announced. "Everything I own goes to Jake because family means blood. Real blood." Scattered claps filled the yard. Tom, Emma's cousin, suddenly called out, "What about Emma?" The microphone caught the silence that followed. Mark chuckled coldly. "She's here as a guest, not as my daughter." Then he looked directly at Emma. "I kept quiet for years out of respect for her mother, but the truth is she was never mine." Conversations shattered. A few people gasped. Emma felt every eye turning toward her. Emma stood up slowly, pushing her chair back. She spoke calmly, the way she addressed parents at the hospital when sharing unexpected news. "Mark, you've told that story for 20 years. May I have 60 seconds to share mine?" He smirked and waved a hand. "Go ahead. Won't change anything." Emma opened her bag and pulled out the envelope. "7 years ago I mailed this to you. You returned it unopened." She held up the red stamp, "Returned to sender." A murmur rippled through the yard. Mark's jaw tightened. "What is that?" She answered softly, "The truth you avoided." Emma broke the seal. She unfolded the first document. "This is a paternity test from Midstate Genomics Laboratory." She read clearly, "Sample A, Emma Ashford. Sample B, saliva trace from Mark Ashford. Probability of paternity, 99.998%. Several people inhaled sharply. Mark barked, "That's fake." Emma held it toward Tom. "Call the lab. The number is on the letterhead." Tom scanned the paper and said, "It's real, Mark." Mark's voice cracked. "It doesn't prove anything." Emma didn't argue. She simply reached into the envelope again. "The DNA is only half," she said. "The rest is from Grace." Emma unfolded Grace's letter. The handwriting wavered, but the message was sharp. She read 2 sentences aloud. "I caught Mark with a woman named Paula behind the community hall 6 months before Emma was born. Helen never betrayed anyone. Mark did, and I stayed silent." The yard shifted. People looked away, some in disbelief, others in disgust. Laura stood up. "She wasn't confused, Mark," she said firmly. "Helen cried on my couch the night she discovered your affair. She stayed loyal. You punished her for what you did." Jake stepped back, his face pale as ash. Mark slammed his hand on the table. "This is my birthday. You came here to ruin me." Emma shook her head. "I came because Jake asked me." Mark pointed at her, trembling. "She wants the house. She's been plotting for years." Emma replied quietly, "I don't want your house. I have my own home. I just want the truth known." Mark scanned the crowd, desperate for support, but nobody stepped forward. Tom folded his arms. Anna wiped tears. A worker from Mark's crew walked out without saying a word. The story he built was collapsing in minutes. Jake finally spoke, voice trembling. "Dad, is it true about Paula?" Mark stared at him, unable to deny or defend. The silence was heavier than any confession. Jake's shoulders dropped. "I thought so," he whispered. Emma stepped forward. You always asked who my real father is, she said softly. He's standing right outside. Everyone looked toward the driveway. Ben stood beside his truck, arms crossed, steady and calm. Emma's voice was gentle. DNA says you're my father, Mark. But Ben is my dad. She placed the documents on the table. This time try opening them. Emma walked toward the gate, passing relatives whose expressions shifted from shock to quiet respect. Laura held the gate open. Tom nodded as she walked by. She didn't run or cry. She simply left the yard and stepped into the life she had built without Mark. Ben opened the truck door for her and she climbed in. After 2 blocks of silence he asked, "You okay?" Emma exhaled slowly. "I'm done," she said. Finally done. And for the first time the weight she carried for 20 years lifted. She had spoken the truth and walked away free.